Chapter 11, 52 Days After. Beckett, you up? Callie, locked and loaded, about to leave for your house. Why are you awake? Beckett, promised Jay I'd be his first customer. Want me to bring you something? I won't be long. Callie, romantic. Beckett, rudeness. Callie, I'm serious, it's sweet. Beckett, blah, blah. Coffee with cream and sugar? Callie, already made mine, travel mugging it today. Thanks though, about to walk over. Beckett, okay, Forrest Gump. Beckett, you still there? Callie, yep. Beckett, I'm leaving the new Strokes album on your workbench. Enjoy. Callie, best friend ever. The walk to Lori and Beckett's took a little over half an hour, headphones on and my bell bottoms skimming the sidewalk. In the summer, the sky arrived in patches of fog sliced by random bursts of sunlight. It's usually colder in June than it is in December, and I loved that about San Francisco, the way we layered our clothes in the summer while the rest of the country shed them in the heat. My shift passed in comfortable repetition, hammering metal, unstringing and stringing stones and pearls, drilling and hammering again. Lori was in a meeting all afternoon, and Beckett stayed at the coffee shop longer than he'd predicted, so I had the place to myself. By 2 o'clock, I'd finished my to-do list and headed out, thinking I'd go for a run or call Maddie to see if she wanted to practice. But Beckett was walking in as I was walking out, and he talked me into going up to the roof deck with him instead. Just for a little while, he said. You'll have plenty of time at home before the show tonight. Doors at 9, he told me. You're coming with us, no questions asked. I nodded. Inside the house, we climbed up the stairs to the second floor, and then again to the third, where the window in Beckett's bedroom opened onto the roof. Planters lined the deck, small boxes Lori nailed together from reclaimed wood pallets and filled with orange and purple feathered bird of paradise flowers. We sat, me in the lounger with my legs stretched out in front, and Beckett in the canvas camping chair. How was the coffee shop? I asked. Busy, he said. Too busy to get to talk much, but I like being there, you know. I read the newspaper and had an espresso, super classy stuff. Since I'd known him, which was pretty much forever, Becca had been in exactly 2.5 relationships. Number one, the summer after seventh grade, just a few months before he came out to me and his family and everyone, kind of, he met Johnny Strickland, a boy 2 years older and from a different school. They met at Ocean Beach and spent a few weeks together swapping mixed CDs and holding hands, IMing incessantly and exchanging favorite books, favorite poems, favorite clothes even. I sort of knew about the relationship while it was happening, knew they were friends, and that Beckett had fallen into this weird distant haze all summer. We spent less time together during those months than ever before, and I hated it. But I'd always figured he'd end up falling for boys over girls, and I wanted him to have time to make that decision. Afterward, when school started and Johnny began his sophomore year while Beckett was back to middle school for eighth grade, Johnny ended things over the phone. Told Beck he hoped to see him around, but classes would be keeping him pretty busy that year. He landed a starting spot on the soccer team and had plans to try out for the school play. He wouldn't have time to hang around at the beach with Beck and probably wouldn't have time to keep in touch, even. They never actually made out or declared themselves a couple when whatever it was happening, but me and Beckett counted him as the first in the tally because we both knew Johnny talked him into coming out, even though Johnny never realized he'd done it. That's why Beckett forgave him for breaking his heart on a phone call. Point 5. Alan Nelson, Alta Plaza Park, the night of graduation after freshman year. First kiss, no real interaction afterward. Number 2. Jacob Stevenson, his first real boyfriend. Jacob was in our class, a super nice kid who played basketball and liked to snowboard on the weekends with his family in Tahoe. They'd been pretty good together, but it only lasted a few months. Beckett wasn't really into sports, though we made an effort and went to a handful of Jacob's games. And Jacob had a way different taste in music, though Beckett dragged him to a few shows at the Independent that Jacob endured with a bored head nod. It wasn't anyone's fault, not really, and the breakup was clean and neat and just a little bit sad, but for the most part, they were still friendly at school. So even though it hadn't been very long, I could tell it was different with Jay. I wanted to work with him, he said, and not because I'm lonely, because I actually enjoy his company, you know? I'd rather be hanging out with him than not be hanging out with him, except for you and my mom. There's no one else I can say that about. We talked about the show at the Boom Boom Room that night and about Nothing Right, how we needed to practice as much as possible before Isaac Thompson's gig. Have you had any luck? I asked when he told me he spent the day before researching local police reports for info about recent abductions and muggings. He shook his head. I couldn't find any patterns, he told me. I mean, sure, there are purse snatchers and assaults in the city, he said, but since we found your dad's backpack, it wouldn't make sense to link the disappearance to a mugging, unless that guy at the construction site knows more than he let on. I nodded and admitted that I'd gone back to look for the homeless man earlier that week, that I'd taken the bus to the site and searched him out. But he was nowhere to be found. The makeshift tent had been torn down, the stove, sleeping bag, and chair were gone too. Why didn't you say something, Cal? I would have gone with you, he said. But I shook my head. I thought he'd be willing to give me more information if it was just me instead of a whole group of us, I told him. It doesn't matter now. I doubt we'll be able to find him again. Plus, you were right. He didn't seem the type to really hurt someone. Rob them, maybe, but that's about it. And from what I figured, getting mugged didn't typically lead to falling off the face of the earth. What about the abduction stuff? I asked. I found a handful of cases in the Bay Area, but they were all minors, he said. Plus, most of them were related to domestic issues, divorced dads trying to move their kids out of state, that kind of thing. Nothing that seemed like it might have something to do with your dad. I'd researched the statistics too, and even though it was nice of Beckett to make an effort, I'd already figured my dad's disappearance had nothing to do with kidnapping or abduction. There was no reason for anyone to snatch him. He was just a normal guy, our family a normal one before the disappearance. Eventually, Beckett asked about the Habitat for Humanity program, the first time it had been mentioned since the campsite and the black eye. Have you applied? He asked. Is this really happening, or is it just kind of happening? You know, like in your head and not actually in reality. He cracked his dimples, because I'm rooting for the latter. The bass of the neighbor's car radio thumped next door, and somewhere in the distance a car alarm shrieked. I pulled my knees to my chest and tucked my Chuck tees under the hem of my jeans. I'd always had big feet. Should have been 6 feet tall considering the skis I've sported since sixth grade. One of the reasons I favored wide leg jeans and boot cuts over the trendy skinny jeans most girls wore. Well, you have to be 18 to volunteer, I told him, so it can't happen in reality until October. I can't apply until then. But there are all kinds of things I can start doing now to be a more competitive applicant. Like, I should have been tutoring ESL students or volunteering at homeless shelters, both recommendations in the catalog, so that's what I told him. You'd be great at that, he said. You're honest and down to earth, a hard worker. Plus, you're good at making people feel comfortable and making people not feel bad about themselves. It was the nicest thing anyone had said to me in a long time. Thanks, I said. And he said, you got it. And then, considering everything that's happened to you, you seem pretty solid to me. I mean, I'm still annoyed about Portland, but I'm also kind of proud of you for thinking of something different, something that's more original and maybe more important than going to college right away. But I didn't feel very solid or stable. I couldn't turn my brain off from thoughts of that photo from 1906, and I felt like the whole summer would be over before I knew it and that nothing would have changed. You know, it's not like you have to make the decision now, he said. He kicked off his sneakers, cayenne colored low tops, that I'd helped him pick out on Haight Street a few months earlier after Sunday brunch. College applications will be due around the same time, early fall, so apply for both. You don't have to make up your mind right now. Jesus, I'm surprised you can decide what to wear in the morning with all that's happened. His pale toes wiggled while he talked. There's no harm in waiting. You're allowed to take your time. That night, I met Beckett and Jay on the corner of Fillmore and Geary, outside the Boom Boom Room, a gritty club I'd been to a handful of times, but not lately. It was an all-ages show, and the doors opened at 6, but we showed up around 9 because everyone who went to clubs knew not to show up on time. So we stood in line, waiting to buy tickets and have our hands marked with the gigantic blue underage X. There were high school girls in belted dresses and ballet flats, boys in beanies and vintage tees, and a group of girls sporting gypsy skirts and hippie apron tops. I scanned the swimming masses of skater kids, girls in prairie dresses like Maddie would have worn if she'd come with us, and hipsters sporting trucker hats and old school sneakers. You're looking for your dad, Beckett said to me, and I pegged you for a pessimist. You're looking for him everywhere we go. I shrugged, embarrassed to have been caught. What good does it do, searching for someone who isn't here? He's not all you have, you know, he told me. You have me too, he said. I nodded and nudged his shoulder with my shoulder before casting my eyes to the ground. Inside, the room pulsed, the small space packed with people of all ages, from ours to our parents, the heat of the crowd binding to the sticky floors and dark-colored walls. They were in between bands when we got there, and roadies switched the gear on stage from the openers to the headliners. The club played a high-strung electronic track as a filler, even though the crowd oozed a mellow vibe, and the headliner would be, according to their advertisement, jazz with a drip of funk. We'd been there about half an hour by the time the band sauntered on stage, a group of lamppost thin black guys with a matching square rim specs, and a moon faced white woman with short haired 1920s swoop. Y'all are looking gorgeous out there, she crooned into the mic, wrapping us around her finger in just one sentence. She wore a short, tight black dress, high-heeled red ankle boots, and silver chandelier earrings that spun the lights exactly the way they should have. She was everything you wanted for a lead vocals in a jazz funk band. Jay moved behind Beck and placed his hands on Beck's hips, and I suddenly became a third wheel. So I told Beckett I'd be back in a few and headed to the bar for a bottle of water. And that's where I ran into Isaac Thompson. I think I know you, he said. Yeah? I asked, leaning into the wood corner of the bar, sandwiched between a girl who clearly needed a drink and a girl who clearly did not. I don't know, I said. He wore all things nondescript. Cords, or maybe were dark colored jeans, I couldn't be sure in the lighting, a t shirt thin and faded with the white block letters of a band's name, or maybe a music venue I'd never heard of, black tennis shoes like Vans or Converse, but missing the swoosh or the star. His hair was short, and his eyes were clear brown that I remembered from fourth grade. Okay, maybe not, he said. I'm pretty terrible when it comes to remembering names and faces. The bartender tapped a blue fingernail on the counter and said, "What you havin'?" And Isaac asked for a Fanta, grape, no glass. And I didn't mean to, but I actually laughed out loud, right there in his face. And then I said, "Make that too," surprising him and me both. Like Kool-Aid, he said, liquid sugar. I nodded, like Smarties or Fun Dip. I said, I always loved the tang of the purple and the red and the orange flavors caked on those white candy sticks. We waited, me tugging on my gold horn necklace, the one with one hand, and rubbing the glass piece in my pocket with the other, and Isaac watching the crowd. Then the bartender with the fingernails gave us the sodas, and Isaac had a credit card in her hand before I had time to argue. I should have said thank you, or maybe I can pay for mine, but instead I said, I'm Callie Pace. You were right. We went to fourth grade together, which didn't sound the way I wanted it to. I knew that I knew you, he said. We tried to move out of the way so people behind us could order at the bar. I'm Callie, I said again. And then, it's not as good as I wanted it to be, motioning to the Fanta after I took a sip. You're crazy, he said. This stuff is like liquid gold. Big smile, a small gap in his front top teeth, perfect lips. Says who? I raised an eyebrow skeptically, teasing him. Says me, but I'm hooked on sugar like these cats are hooked on booze, he said, motioning to the crowd at the bar, competing for the bartender's attention. So are you here alone? He asked, and then, wow, that sounded unbelievably lame, and maybe a little creepy. I didn't mean it as like a pickup line or anything, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding mine. But I was smiling. It's okay, I told him. I told him I was there with Beckett and a guy who made the whole gig thing happen, realizing as I talked. Oh, excuse me. I told him I was there with Beckett, the guy who made the whole gig thing happen, realizing as I talked that Isaac probably didn't know I was part of Nothing Right. The loud music muddled things even more when he asked if Beckett was the manager for the guy on stage. So I shook my head and said, explained about our band and about Beckett's dad, working with his dad, and being the one who first recommended us, and his dad always go by all and did his dad always go by all three names? Because it was kind of, I'm not making judgments, but it was a little bit showy. All three of them sound good together and stuff, but it's still pretty weird, using them all the time, I said. He laughed. Are you always so honest? Which for some reason reminded me that part of my job always was keeping tabs on Beck. I told him, I've got friends up front. Let's go by the stage. Then we shouldered through the crowd and I introduced Isaac to Beck and Jay, even though the music was too loud for them to hear me. We stayed there, right in front of the speaker, listening to the warm beats of jazz and the milky voiced woman singing with the guitars and the drums until set break. I took mental note, like I always did at shows, memorizing the way the drummer played the stand, excuse me, memorizing the way the drummer played the stand in a swift 1-2, 1-2 to create a metallic sound for the more frantic parts of the song. And when the band finally stopped, we hung around talking about how great the music was, how perfect and balanced and clean. Fresh air? Isaac asked, and I nodded, but Becca and Jay said they needed beverages and headed to the bar. The night air cooled us off as the audience stumbled out of the club and onto the sidewalk. It smelled like clove cigarettes and crowded concert sweat, and we walked up to the corner and stood under a lamppost where we could get a good view of everyone hanging out in front. I was sorry to hear about your dad, Isaac said as he pulled a pouch of Big League Chew bubblegum out of his back pocket. I laughed. Where'd you find that stuff? I haven't seen the shredded pink gum since I was little. Like I said, I've got a thing for sugar. He unfolded the top and held it out, offering to share, but I shook my head. Do you know anything yet? He asked. I mean, about your dad? And then quickly, that was nosy. I'm sorry. I just read about it in the newspaper when it happened. My mom has the Chronicle sent to us in Paris, and I recognize the name. From you, from school. No, it's okay, I said. It's probably good for me to talk about it, I guess. And then I told him about the photo. I told him about the exhibit and buying the book and the picture I couldn't stop staring at. I should have told Beck first, or maybe my mom should have taken the book to her so we could have sat at the kitchen table talking about how badly we wanted an answer, how sharp and huge that wanting was. So huge that I'd started to wonder if I believed in the unbelievable in a photo from 100 years ago. But then there was something about Isaac, the vague familiarity from fourth grade, but at the same time, the distance of all those years and that ocean between his real home and mine. Maybe it was that distance that made it safe to share my secret with him. I know it's ridiculous, I said. And I know it's not him, obviously. I mean, it can't be. But still, I can't get it out of my head. I keep imagining him there, envisioning him stuck on the other time period as he tries to make sense of the earthquake, being somewhere he's not supposed to be. Even as I recognized the ridiculousness of it, I'd allowed the photo from the art exhibit to become some kind of possibility to cling to, a confirmation that my dad was okay. I'd imagined that even though he wasn't home anymore, he was somewhere infinitely far away and absolutely unreachable, but still somewhere all the same, above ground in 1906. Not in my world any longer, but in the world at least. I guess I keep envisioning him there because I don't have anything else, I said. Besides his backpack, the photo is the only clue I've found. His backpack? What backpack? He asked. So I told him about the man at the job site too, and about having to pay to get my dad's stuff back. And then he said exactly what he should have. That's so screwed, Callie. I'm sorry you had to go through that. He didn't tell me that I'd lost it, that my dad's image in 1906 was impossible. He didn't say that I was being crazy or desperate or any of those things I'd told myself a billion times since I'd first seen the photo. Instead, he said, I think there are lots of things people will never figure out, like the Bermuda Triangle or the Great Pyramids of Giza, seven wonders of the world kind of stuff. Lots of things don't have a real explanation, like the sixth sense. Scientists can't actually explain how or why it works, that gut feeling thing, but it exists. You can't deny it. He kept going, or deja vu, UFOs, and maybe people who go missing and never get found. Isaac was the first person who admitted the possibility that we'd never find my dad. For 52 days, everyone kept saying we'd locate him eventually. Surely we'd track him down or he'd turn up. But Isaac Thompson looked right at me, looked me right in the face, and said it out loud. There were people who went missing and never got found. And that meant there was a chance my dad might be one of them. Because the truth was, lots of people disappeared without a trace. Maybe time is one of those things too, he said, the possibility of parallel universes or quantum jumping. We don't really know how everything works. There are tons of things science still can't explain. In front of the club, the crowd thinned out as people headed inside for the second set, but we just stood there, quiet for a while. And then he said, Do you know about the Tao hum? I shook my head. It's this low pitched sound heard in locations all over the world, usually only in quiet places, though, in peaceful spots like the Big Island and Tao, New Mexico. They say up to 5% of the population can hear it, a soft drone, this low frequency noise that can't be picked up on recording devices. Some people claim there's a vibration, an actual physical buzz they feel too. He pulled a receipt out of his pocket and folded his gum inside of it. I'm sorry, that was gross. I shrugged and said, What causes it, the noise? Well, that's the whole point. Some doctor in New Zealand recently recorded it, said it peaked at a frequency of 56 hertz. He proved it exists, but there's still no explanation. It's just this phenomenon, with no known cause. Some people blame it on the auditory or nervous system. Others say it's related to the ocean floor, some kind of infrasonic wave thing, he said, and I raised my eyes. I know, I'm kind of nerdy about science stuff, he added. I wondered if I would have caught him blushing had the light been better. Some people attribute it to this thing called spontaneous otoacoustic emissions. he continued, talking faster, where the ears generate their own sounds. But the tau hum happens in regular clusters, and the ear thing has been recorded with equal frequency in all, the tau hum happens in regional clusters, and the ear thing has been recorded with equal frequency in all age groups and locations. Plus, the guy in New Zealand verified its existence. Essentially, there is no answer, an unknown. I think there are lots of unknowns, and maybe your dad's going missing is one of those. But I didn't want my dad to become an unknown, and I said so. So that's just it, he told me. Maybe you get to decide. Maybe it's your job to make sure he doesn't become an unknown. And the earthquake image is a way to do that. What if those things you're imagining aren't in your imagination? I shook my head. Like what? Like visions or something? It sounded absurd coming out of my mouth, and I said so. That's impossible. Isaac shrugged. Who knows? Parallel universe stuff? Another realm or dimension? Some other past that's actually happening now, too? And somehow you're tapping into it through the visions. There's probably a better word for it, but all I'm saying is you don't really know. That's insane, I said. It most definitely is, he said, and then insane and completely impossible, but maybe not, he shrugged. Maybe it's totally possible. I'm just saying, if you decide to believe in the photo, then your dad's whereabouts won't be a mystery anymore. And then he said, and it's not like you have to decide right away. There's no harm in waiting to make that call. He cracked his knuckles and dropped his eyes like he was nervous he'd said too much. Hey, Isaac, I said. Hey, you. So that he was finally looking at me again when I thanked him. What are you thanking me for? He asked. For not making me feel like a crazy person, for letting me tell you the truth, for being honest about the fact that my dad might not ever come back, and even for that gross grape soda. He smiled, those huge brown eyes staring right back at me. Any time, Callie Pace. Any time, he said, as we walked back towards the club together.